Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of on Authentic Leadership with the Colonel and the Coach. I am one of your co-hosts, Matt Smith, along with Cam Ellsworth. And today we have an exceptionally special guest in Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, retired Joe Bass. Joe, welcome to our podcast, and it's an absolute honor to have you today.
Well, thank you so much. As I was sharing with you all, I'm honored to be with you guys. And you guys had me at the title of the podcast, authentic leadership, but also the fact that I get to hang out with the colonel and a coach. And those are like the folks that you want to hang out with, right? Like the colonel in the military is a person really kind of doing the thing. And then, of course, everybody needs a coach, and our coaches have all played critical roles in our lives. Doesn't matter whether you were in grade school, college, or even now. So I'm very excited to spend time with y'all.
So, Joe, if you could just tell us maybe a little bit about your journey. And again, we've read about born in Hawaii and daughter of an army, and maybe moving around and what got you into the Air Force, being daughter of someone from the army, and then maybe a little bit of how you rose from that beginning to where you ended up retiring.
Absolutely. So first off, before we do, let me just, since we talk about championship teams all the time, let me just real quick. Okay, I'm a little bit sad we're not going to the Super Bowl, but I still have to support my team, and little something about me. Big Kansas City Chiefs fan by marriage. My husband's from Kansas, and so you got to be.
There you go.
Um, hey, there's a couple things that you said that we'll try to pull on, and I'll try to be succinct, but I think they're important nonetheless. I'll start with just a little bit about me. So Joe Bass. Served in the United States Air Force for 31 years. I am an Army brat, though. My dad served in the Army for 24 years. And I watched him get up every morning at about 4:30 to go do PT, and I thought there is no way I'm joining the Air Force. So, what's crazy is, right, like, Matt knows we all get up for 5 o'clock at 5 o'clock PT anyway. So I signed up when I was 18 years old, primarily because I grew up old school. My dad was not going to pay for college. And so I had to figure out life. I wasn't also probably quite mature enough yet for college. And so I thought I'll do 4 quick years, get a GI Bill, and then roll out. Like that was the game plan. I ended up joining the Air Force. And then at the 4 year mark, I had a Honda Civic that I needed to pay off. And so I thought, okay, 4 more years. Probably about the 8 year mark was when I was all in. Right. I actually served in some really meaningful units with brothers and sisters who paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I started to understand that service is way more than a GI Bill, way more than a Honda Civic, and it's really a higher calling. And so to that led to 31 years in the United States Air Force. And I tell people all the time, like, the Air Force has given me way more that I can ever give back. So what a treat it's been. I retired in March of 2024 from the Air Force, but all I did was pivot a bit and just shift kind of where and how I serve. Um, Two things are true, and that is, if you've ever served, that long in the national security space, it's really hard to hang up. And so I'm still in the national security space, and I'm still in the people space, because it's the people that ultimately make the mission happen. And so those are the things that I do right now, as well as pour into my family.
It's interesting you say that, Matt and I, and thank you for that. But Matt and I, we connected over a hockey team, and we do different work with some different organizations. And we keep coming back to the same thing, that it's people on people, and they might wear a different jersey or uniform or whatever, but it just keeps coming back to people, communication, service, leadership, things of those nature. So really, really appreciate.
Coach, one thing, this is what happens when you get a little bit older, you forget. But the one thing that you said that made me, that I wanted to pull that string on, is you said, "Hey, like, you were born in Hawaii and this and that." This is where I tell people, don't always believe everything you read online,
All
right?
right.
Like, so somewhere, by the way, after I got named Chief Master in the Air Force, literally that next day, my sister calls me up and she's like, "Dude, you have a Wikipedia site. And I was like, what? Like Wikipedia? Like who did that? Right? Like how'd it happen? And so when I went on it, I was like 40% of the information was wrong. So they put on that, hey, born in Hawaii. I actually graduated in Hawaii, but
Wow.
being an Army brat, I was actually born in Puyallup, Washington. But again, and even in the Wikipedia, they had my dad's rank. Right, he retired as a warrant officer, had him as a colonel, and he's like, "Can you have them fix it?" And I'm like, "Dad, I have more things to worry about. Like right now, I'm a thing online. I don't like it." So it was. I always tell people like, don't believe what you read online because literally anybody can put that out there.
Well, thank you for correcting me. And no, I mean I think it's a great lesson. And then, boss man, we're gonna jump in with your question, and
Yeah.
then I
So,
think go
yeah.
ahead.
So, well, thank you so much. And I guess just my first question, would be, I feel like as an airman, and I'm obviously retired airman as well, and somebody who's still in the business, just involved with that, whether that's the Air Force activities, leadership, development, mentoring, all that sort of stuff. It seems like we have gotten to know you just as well as, if not better, than you were when you were the chief master sergeant of the Air Force. And you're always uplifting people. You're always telling people stories. You're an amazing storyteller, at every turn. And I just wanted you to just to kind of maybe articulate in your own words, sort of like the who is greater than the why. And just if there's any messages in there for our younger audience who just obviously is very reliant upon social media, but just from they grew up with it and they're sharing their own stories, and the story that's going to on social media resonate forever. And you just seem to do such a good job of just being your authentic self and just sharing really with the world kind of who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I will tell you that nobody has gotten a playbook on how to be, on social media. In fact, when you think about it in kind of the last decade or so, we've all kind of been in this figure it out mode and certainly as a leader, I can remember in 2016, 17 timeframe having to figure out, do I want to, as an Air Force chief at the time stationed in the Pentagon for the first time, do I want to have an online presence? And if so, why? And some of that was I fundamentally believe in flattened communication, right? Being able to just communicate to the folks that serve alongside us to be able to get truth out there, to be able to get information out there, because when our folks have the information, they're able to perform to their best. And so that was a really reflective time because I decided out of nowhere that I was going to start kind of a private Facebook group with folks within the Air Force to just start to pass information. But I was a novice and still I would say for years and having to pull myself, kind of out of my comfort zone for the sake of being able to kind of get everybody rallied around a common purpose. And so it's not necessarily been by choice, but I realize that as leaders, we want to be in that space or not. The reality is people are in that space. We talk about the information domain all the time, and we know that he who gets the information out first wins, whether it's truthful or not. We all are going to have to figure out how to own this. And we've chosen, and I've chosen to try to own it, if you will, because I just fundamentally think there's just, more good than not. And so why not share?
Well, before I hand it over to Cam, I just want to say thank you. Thank you just on behalf of your followers for just being that your authentic self and sharing your message and whatnot. And it's always a pleasure, not just to see your post, but just to see the comments of the people that are supportive of you and your message and what you mean to them. So thank you so
Thank you.
much.
So, Joe, coming off of the social media platform, and again, you said somewhere in that 2016, 2017 range, you had to make an active decision. Could you just talk about a little bit of like more like the flat messaging and how you did that prior, right? Like, so like now we're in this different world, but what what was the prior, and how did you learn that, and how did you take that on prior to maybe forced to get into the online space?
Yeah. I was really fortunate early in my career to get selected to serve in Air Force Special Operations, specifically Joint Special Ops. And when you spend any time with those folks and understand the culture, what you understand is, right, like every teammate counts. Everybody has to have full on information so that we can actually accomplish the mission well. And so, my first soft assignment, I was a young senior airman, a young E4, getting assigned to a unit with people who were to some degree, more senior than me. But I got an opportunity to watch people be able to have the space and the culture and climate within their organization to speak up. And that was just fascinating for me, especially coming from what we used to call kind of like, the vanilla Air Force, right? Like going into an organization like that. And so that's where I first learned the strength that flat communication brings to the table. We expect everybody to be big boys and girls, and they've got to be able to just move out. Well, kind of newsflash, like back when I grew up, we just did, the internet started to become a thing, right? Like Gen Z, that's all they know. But that wasn't always the thing. And so we had, a lot of analog communication. And so as much as possible, I continued to appreciate flattened communication. And whenever I could help influence, that was my way of choice. I was also the person who didn't appreciate when I was in a position and felt like I got no information. And you had to figure out how to lead, right? Like, and you've got information hoarders all around you. Like, that was so frustrating. But I tell people all the time, right? It's sometimes the not so great examples that help define you so that you can, again, shape the leadership that you're going to have and kind of define who you're going to be.
That's fascinating. I appreciate that. What about, maybe now in the Gen Z and now you're leading those people who did you see any challenges or do you have any advice on maybe they live in a more digital world, but there's still the human element. So now, how are you now trying to force communication both ways, both digitally, but maybe more in that interaction?
Kim, I wish I had all the answers on a lot. Like, we're still trying to figure it out. Hey, if I can, by the way, I love sharing books that I think are helpful to folks. And if I can share a couple books that I think
100%.
everybody from your audience needs to read it. After you read it, shoot me a note on LinkedIn and tell me how you like it. But the first one is Gen Z Unfiltered. And then the second one would be The Anxious Generation. And I share those two books primarily because they helped me, especially in my previous position wearing the uniform, kind of understand this generation to include understanding the kids that we're raising in my own house a little bit better and to understand how they communicate. And it helped me understand what we all know to be true, like, especially, in the profession that I was in. We used to have this thing called recall rosters back in the day. Like, and you would kind of, in a pyramid, be able to call folks. Like, those days are almost gone. Like, people don't pick up their phone anymore. Like, you better text first, right? Like, if you don't text, yeah, and you don't show up at people's houses nowadays, like this whole texting phenomenon thing, like we've had to figure this thing out. And so, what I've learned, is a bunch of different data points. I don't know how true they are, but I've learned that people appreciate a text first, like they're not going to answer the phone. The other thing that I've learned, anyway, how to communicate with this generation, we're all trying to figure it out. And we're all adapting our communication style. And as a leader, we learn all the time, you've got to communicate 7 different ways, 7 times, and continue to get it in. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I am adapting who I am to be able to reach all generations serving in a workforce so that it can get out there. And I think some of that communication, if I can just pivot a little bit, is listening more. So instead of kind of my communication, it's, hey, have some reverse mentoring and listening to this younger generation on how do you receive information and how are you getting it, and trying to figure out different clever ways to do that. One last data point. I do know that this generation, right, the attention span is a lot shorter than ever before. And I used to share this with leaders all the time. If you think the old way of kind of briefing, and 1 hour briefings is what to do, we probably are missing the target because this generation can receive information on many different kind of forms all at one time. If you have kids, right? Like they're on their iPad, they're on their computer, they're on right, all the different devices going on. And they typically have about a 8-second attention span. We've got to figure out how to understand that and communicate.
That's tremendous. Thank you for that. I think just to use that generational example, if we could just pivot to your time just from an AETC perspective, and for our guests, that's Air Education and Training Command. Joe was in Second Air Force, just leading a multitude of organizations and its airmen, everything from technical training schools all the way. I mean,
Basic
literally
training. Yeah.
basic training, BMT, everything. So there you had your thumb on just so many different trades and AFSCs, Air Force specialty codes and whatnot. And I just want to talk just for a second is either in the context of that generation, generational sort of context. But I was telling Cam before we got on the podcast that we used to not always send our best and brightest to AETC. I'll just speak from my personal experiences. I thought like they were good, but when I got to the line squadron, I thought like, wow, like these people are really good. And then there was sort of a culture shift, I would argue, Joe, where we said, you know what, if we're going to have some awesome airmen, right, and we're going to get them on the sort of from left of launch, left of training, all the way through to graduating and being awarded an AFSC. We need to make sure that we send the best officers, the best enlisted there, so that we get the best product. And I would argue that to a certain extent, you were responsible for that. At least culturally, that's what I saw. I was in AATC at that time, just being part of the home center and whatnot. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to that, because if you don't get the front end piece right, it doesn't matter if it's pilot training, CISO, ABM, comm officers, or anything to do with any of our airman specialties that make the magic happen to fly, fight, and win with airspace and cyberspace, then it doesn't really matter, how important that mission is. We're not going to get it done well. So can you just talk maybe a little bit to your experiences, that you had, and just either things that you did and the positive impact you had, or maybe even the things like, wow, if I could go back and do that over again, here's what I would do.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate you kind of teeing that up, because I'll tell you, whether you're in the military or not, one thing is true: how you train your people will determine how you're going to execute the mission. And I'll tell you, being out of the military now, the one thing that I share with corporate America, everyone in industry, is nobody trains better than the United States military. Nobody. I don't care if you work for Lowe's, Apple, IBM, Amazon, it doesn't matter. And oh, by the way, nobody trains 100% of their workforce like the US military. Every single service member goes through some level of accession training to learn core competencies, to learn values, to learn communication skills, to learn what that organization is. And then after their initial training, we're going to send them to kind of their initial functional training to learn their trade. No organization in the world does that, but the military does. And so to all of your listeners, right, when you're thinking about who to hire, like, hands down, you need to hire a veteran, right? Like, because they have some level of training, both kind of leadership skills as well as functional training. And the training that we give people on how to deal with crisis, how to communicate, how to adapt, like, I could go on and on. Nobody does it better. So if we rely as much as we do in the military on training and education, then we've got to send our best. Right. Like, and that is a cultural shift, because typically, from an operational sense, you want your best in operations. But if you think about it strategically, you want your best to have all elements, right? Like, and I think it's important that if you're going to have folks in the training environment, they have to have operational experience and vice versa. And when you do that right, like, it's just great. I will tell you that I spent a couple different tours in, the command that you were talking about, and it helped me be a better leader, because I spent time in ATC growing and developing folks. When I went back to the operational Air Force, like, it mattered to me because I had skin in the game, right? Because of my operational experience, it helped me be a better leader in the training and education space because I had the operational piece. And so I would say that, it's fundamentally important to make sure, again, this is whether you're in the military or not, to have your strongest swimmers be able to have the experiences on both sides, and to really grow the folks within your organization.
It's fascinating just to hear that, because we come across people in business, right, in different walks that are elite at a specific function. I'm an elite engineer. I'm going to meet an elite salesman. I'm an elite marketer. And because you're elite, you get ascended up, and then all of a sudden you get given a team. And there's more than once I've seen panic set in. Like, what do I do now? Like, I'm really good at this, but I don't know what to do with all these people, how to manage these people, or connect with these people, or listen to these people. So, very sage advice, and really, hopefully, it'll give some people some things to think about on the training side, right? And in sport, we kind of have, I don't know, some type of natural ascension of, whether it's playing, you play your way up, or then you start out at this level as a coach, learn this, learn this, learn this, and grow. But, to the business world and some of the things Matt and I have come across, just there is some of that, like, get ascended
Yeah.
maybe without that training or without those training wheels, how to bring those other people with them.
Kim, there's so many things about leadership that I tie directly into sports because there's so many leadership lessons you can learn. I remember my daughters, both of them played travel softball, and I would sit there for hours, by the way, on the field. And I'm like, oh, the leadership lessons you could learn from this. And that's a whole nother podcast. But what I'll say is whether you're in sports or whether you serve in the military or whatever, more organizations need to benefit from leadership training. If you look at a military member, by the way, whether they serve 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, or 28 years, what you know is this: they are going to get leadership training at different touch points throughout their career that just set them up. If you look at somebody in corporate America, by and large, this isn't all the way true, but by and large, they get what you're talking about, which is they're kind of that functional expert. But I tell people all the time, IQ will only get you so far. The only way you're going to keep going is you've got to have a level EQ. We do not want leaders serving at any level, whether it's academia, industry, corporate America, wherever, leading at the most senior levels, and you really don't have the leadership skills. Like it's just like working out. You have to have your reps and sets.
Joe, I'd like to just pull on that thread for a second. And one thing that we've noticed, at least that I've noticed, is your follow through just is incredible, just as far as staying in touch with people, and communicating. And I've got a couple close friends that you've done that with, and just making sure that where there's high touch, if you will, and with the Colonel and the Coach, Kim and I have just tried to emphasize, because a lot of people just they want what we call just the one hit wonder. They want us to come in, they want us to tell the story, and whether that's 1 hour later, 2 hours later, and then all of a sudden, we're done and the block is checked, right? And whether that's a special ops airman, or whether that's a flying airman, or whether that's a cyber airman, or whether that's someone in a completely different profession. You didn't become that person just through a 1 hour session or a 2 hour session, particularly like Cam talked about being elite. But just for example, in the sports world, you're not ready for the NCAA championship or the Super Bowl or whatever after one practice. There's a multitude of, like you said, sets and reps that take place. I would just be interested in just if you could just talk to, whether that's from a leadership development perspective, or whether that's from a training perspective, or just from a human growth people perspective, just had the importance of having those continuous, contact points, so that that person can grow, and arguably you can get them to a point that even beyond where you're at professionally.
Yeah. I think it's everything that you said. By the way, right, when I talk about reps and sets, like again, this applies for all of us. If you probably went back and asked the people that I served with when I was a young E4, what kind of a leader was I? And did they ever think I'd be chief master in the Air Force? They'd have been like, there's like no way, right? Like I pro I probably wasn't that good, right? But you never fail, you learn. And so you're constantly learning and you're putting yourself out of your comfort zone. And so I'll never forget, as a young non-commissioned officer, I volunteered to lead ethics in a professional development setting for a couple years at Ramstein Air Base. And when you kind of put yourself in the teacher mode, it forces you to actually be a better student. And so I used to share that all the time. You just have like one great thing, like leadership is about consistency. Authentic leadership is 100% about consistency. Who do you show up as all the time? And are your values consistently showing up to the people that you're around? Absolutely think that you can build your reps and you can still stay true to who you are. Like who I am at the core is really who kind of my parents helped shape me to be, but I've gotten better, just like the sports analogy. The reps and sets, the two a days, the constantly trying to improve who you are to be the best version of you. Like it takes work. If we think it's going to happen by kind of scrolling for hours and then magically I'm just going to be a better leader, but I'm filling my brain and my mind up with just garbage, like it's not going to work. So it takes a deliberate effort. It takes goals. It takes all of that to make it happen.
If we went back in time and went to your peers, and when you said you were at that moment where they're like, no way, she's not going to do that. Like,
Yeah.
was there a mentor or two or three or a path? Like, how did you take those steps to ascend?
There was probably 100 mentors that had to help shape and guide this young Joe Bass, right? Like, so if I can, right, I have to first give credit where credit's due, and I have to give some love to my mom who taught me that, kind of, lesson number one, do your job and do it well. So she taught me work ethic, right? Like work hard, work hard, work hard is kind of some of the lessons I learned from her, and how you treat anybody is how you treat everybody. So she taught me some fundamental things, but I think if you probably met folks who knew me at the younger Joe, they would say that she was pretty cocky. She had a mouth on her, a strong opinion, like all of those things. But thank goodness I had supervisors and leaders and peers who didn't just want to cancel me or write me up, but actually take the time to coach me so that I could be better. And that's one thing that I will say that I appreciate about some of the old school leadership is there was more coaching instead of kind of the easy way out, which is just write somebody up, right? Like they took the time to invest and tell me. I'll never forget, by the way, for the military at least, and probably for a lot of our civilians listening, you get a feedback session every year, right? Or every 6 months. And I got feedback every 6 months. But when you think about it, how much of it is actually actionable? And most people have a hard time sharing truth for whatever reason. But I had a major when I was a young staff sergeant give me some feedback. And I'll be honest, it was really good feedback until the very end. And then he said, if I can give you one thing, humility would go a long way. And that was like, oh, dagger, right? Like, but I appreciate it because he addressed something that I need to work on, which is you probably need to work on being a more humble leader, because if you're a humble leader, you're going to be a better teammate. And so that was like, didn't feel good, but it helped set me up to be a better teammate to my friends. And so I tell people all the time, like, feedback is a gift. So whenever you are surrounded by truth tellers who are willing to give it to you, how great it is. So back to your question, I think that from there, I probably had a whole lot of mentors who, by the way, never knew that they were my mentors. I just learned from different ones. I learned from maybe this one person who's really a humble leader, yet they're also very strong and convicted in who they are. And I learned from this one on how to speak, maybe more eloquently. And so I've learned from so many people, but you have to have the humility to do so.
You are the first and only woman to ever hold the post rank that you retired. Was there a time when you recognized that along the path that was rarefied air that you were stepping into? And, how did you approach that where it was, trailblazing to a sense?
Yeah. People, when I first got selected as Chief Master in the Air Force, a lot of people would ask me, oh my gosh, right? How does it feel? And I don't mean to minimize it, but I would look at them and I'd say, it feels the same, right? Like nothing has changed except for the amount of responsibility that you have over the amount of people you had, right? So, as Matt said, I was at Second Air Force leading in a large command that had influence of touching every single person that joins the Air Force. And then I went on to serve with General CQ Brown as his chief, leading our entire Air Force. It felt the same, but the magnitude of the amount of people we were serving wasn't lost on me. I did not go into it thinking, man, like I'm the first woman or Asian American at all, right? Like, because throughout my entire career, just think about yourself as, I'm an airman, I'm a leader, and I'm doing what I need to do. It was interesting because in the information domain, information space that we're in, I never even thought about that, nor did we label it. but media did, right? Like as soon as they announced my selection, there were, media outlets and like within the hour that were like first female chief master sergeant in the Air Force, first Asian American. Like it was wild, and my poor exec at Second Air Force was getting blown up on emails and phone calls saying, "What kind of Asian is she?" Right? Like I mean, it was so interesting. But what I had to learn, because it was a little bit uncomfortable for me accepting that, right? I had to learn that it's just a matter of fact, right? I am the first female to serve in any military branch at the most senior enlisted level. I am, Asian American, and there's a lot of Asian Americans who are super proud of that. So I didn't want to minimize the fact that people were proud of that. So I had to learn to say, okay, got it, I am. In terms of maybe how it made me think or move forward, the only thing that I would tell you, it goes back to again what my mom taught me, which is do your job, do it well. I knew that especially being the first female, that I especially had to make sure that I did my job and do it well, because the goal is that there's no more firsts, that there will be seconds and thirds, and we would eventually quit counting. I do have to also give credit, because I don't give this individual enough credit, but my husband, who we've been married almost 30 years, like I
Wow.
have to give
Congratulations.
him, thank you. I have to give him a lot of credit because he was probably the most influential person to me personally and professionally. We met shortly after I got to my first duty assignment at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And, he's this young Army private first class, and I'm this, brand new young airman stationed at Pope. But I have to give it up again to kind of the culture and all the different services. He being an 82nd Airborne guy had a very strong culture. And he's also a very masculine leader. And so he taught me some principles that I grabbed hold of early on in my career, which is, quit taking things personal, right? Or take the hard left, not the easy right, and play the long game. So he taught me some really good things that helped me last throughout my career as I look back at it. And so I very much appreciate kind of how he's been such a good wingman, battle buddy, sounding board for me.
That's awesome.
I was gonna ask you a little bit, and I mean, maybe you answered the question, but like back to the social media presence and this, there's a really dark, nasty side to that, and to hear you talk about conviction and values and truth and the way that you want to present, how do you combat? Because choice or not, you are out there, and how do you combat that the dark side of unfortunately what is part of that?
Yeah. Kim, this could literally honestly be like a podcast in itself, but I'm very vocal about kind of that dark side of social media. Again, giving credit where credit's due to my husband. When I first got into my last position, one of the things that he kind of stressed on me is I've got to guard my eyes and ears. And so that was great advice, right? Like, how much time do I spend allowing myself to see things that don't help us get after kind of, our goals and mission at hand? And so I was very careful and thoughtful as a leader to guide my eyes and ears, and be thoughtful of what I intake. But that said, I don't know that anything could have really prepared me for the craziness of social media, right? Like prior to becoming the chief master in the Air Force, I was just a normal Joe. Like nobody cared. I had kind of, my online presence, but I was just a numbered Air Force command chief. Like it was very easy to be authentically me because you just didn't know who you were. I'll never forget after they announced that I was going to be the chief master in the Air Force, and I shared with you all, like the next day, I had a Wikipedia site. Also, there were a ton of different media outlets that were writing, quick announcements about me, and my dad sent me one, and that was when I first learned, like, be careful when you read the comments, because the title of the article was, female, first Asian American selected, and she's been in the service for 27 years. So that was kind of the title. the comments said, one person wrote, she might have been in the Air Force 27 years. Most of it must have been on her back. And I was like, that like shock, right? Like immediate, like, are you serious? So you become a public figure whether you want it or not. And so that goes back to guarding your eyes and ears to what you're seeing and just allowing your consistent leadership presence and your character just play out so that you can kind of shame those folks for thinking what they think, but you can't give them the space, to get in your head to change who you are.
I love that. Well, you proved them wrong, and you've you've led by example, and it's just I don't know. It's just mind blowing. And Joe, I think you're maybe tracking, but my wife served for 28 years, and she just retired on the 1st of September. Half the time was active duty Air Force, and then half the time was in the U.S. Air Force Reserves, which that could be an old podcast all to itself as well. As in every person in the reserve is their own A1, A2, A3, A4, and
Yes,
all that sort
yes.
of stuff. It's challenging, but yeah, no, and I also just wanted to give you space if you wanted to talk about the, there's when you first came in 1993, there wasn't as many women in the military writ large. The numbers were in the teens, and now we're looking at anywhere between 21 to 24% of the Air Force is women, which is still the largest percentage out of all five of the services, and whatnot. You regardless of whether or not they're officers or they're enlisted, they do look up to you. They look up to people like yourself, General Lori Robinson, and others. The our sister services have had some great leaders as well as recently as unfortunately earlier this year. But I just maybe if you wanted to spend a moment just talking to uh, the women out there that are trying to find a voice, that are trying to maintain their authentic selves as they navigate this military space that is today.
Yes. Whenever I talk with our service members or other women leaders, what I share with them is again, you've got to play the long game. But what you have to have fundamentally is courage, is competency, and then confidence, right? Like those things really helped me as I led as a leader, sometimes without having examples, women examples ahead of me. I came in back in the 80s, and I'll never forget the first time I saw my first female chief. I was a tech sergeant, and I remember being downrange at the time. And in fact, I think I saw two or three chiefs, female chiefs together downrange. And I went up to them because I was so excited because I'd never seen a female chief. And I remember telling them, like, you inspire me. And what's crazy is I don't even know if they were great chiefs, right? But the fact that they looked like me, I was inspired because prior to that, the only chiefs that I saw were male. And they kind of had one personality, very, dominant, if you will. And so I couldn't see myself in that. So seeing women chiefs were a powerful example for me. And so I say, the power of example is huge because somebody needs to see that. But I also tell people all the time that I hope that it's not just women that I'm inspiring, but also perhaps men, because all of us are just trying to be the authentic leaders that we're trying to be so that we can inspire this next generation to lead.
For the layman, non-military,
Yes.
what timeline would that have been from getting into seeing that downrange chief? Or
Probably between the 8 and 10-year mark for me
wow,
was when
oh wow,
when I saw my first female chief. I'm sure they were around, but I was also in operations, and I was also in special ops for a lot of my earlier part of my career. So you just didn't see that. And what's interesting is when you kind of if you study women in leadership, whether you're military or not, when you look at a lot of where women leaders are, they're typically in your medical fields or in your administration fields, your HR, right? That is something that we took a look at strategically in the Air Force to say, okay, why is that? Is that because we're maybe not providing the opportunities early on in training? Are we kind of herding the masses into certain different career fields, or what is it? And I think there's great studies out there that show, again, we've just got to figure out how to provide opportunity. I was very fortunate in my career path that I started off in, command and control, one Charlie, and I understood operations. And I think that having that understanding helped me because I could understand the strengths of operations. I understood support. I understood all aspects of what makes the Air Force mission happen. And that gave me in my mind kind of a leg up in just who I am today.
I love that. You talked about just essentially at different points in your career, whether you're enlisted, whether you're officer, whether you're a civilian, whatever, you would think that people are going to send you to school when you need to go to school and get the training, whether that's an advanced technical degree or whether that's an advanced academic degree, a master's degree, a PhD, and all that sort of stuff. However, when you mentioned our younger generations earlier in the podcast, a lot of them don't necessarily want to pursue that. Like to tell them, okay, you want to be whatever in whatever discipline. It could be the medical. Well, you need to achieve a medical degree or a PhD in research, analytics or all that sort of stuff. Some of them are amazingly talented right out of the chute. I mean, literally in high school, or maybe they haven't even gone to college yet, or they don't necessarily want to go to college. And just through your social media, I've noticed you just spend a lot of time talking to our younger generation. I just was wondering if you could share with us, that perspective that they have, that maybe they don't want to go sit. I mean, our traditional method of teaching people is still to go sit in a classroom, listen to somebody talk, like you said, for an hour or even longer. If it's a multi-credit course, it could be sitting there for 3 hours. And like you
Yeah.
said, they have an attention span of 8 minutes. And Kim and I, we work with a lot of younger generation people, and we're very sensitive to that, where for us, the maximum is 30 minutes. And we try to get our message across in 30 minutes. What are the things that you emphasize to them, particularly as they're pursuing their passions, whatever those passions may be?
Yeah. I think kind of it's two different scenarios that we have to look at. One is from the aspect of the institution or the enterprise on how do we present learning to our folks? And are we thinking about it in ways that we have different pathways based on all the different learning styles to allow people to become their best, right? I used to kind of hit that home a lot, especially when I was in the training command, because we have to look at training different. If we're doing it the same way when I came in, then we're probably wrong. And so, what are the different modalities? And we've got super smart people who know how to think this through, but they need to think unconstrained and not kind of the old way. Then the other piece is, what do we tell this generation? And more than tell this generation, how do we really shape training and education and development in a way that they are able to grasp it and receive it and then become their best? Again, lots of big brains really do have to get after this. When I think about high performing teams, and I've led a lot of high performing teams, I was a little bit different because I actually didn't care how many stripes they had, what rank they had. I just wanted a high performing team, which, right, like this may be Coach Cam, like this might be your thing because you really don't care, which, by the way, is another reason why I'm a big fan of the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Like when you think about earlier days when they grabbed Patrick Mahomes, like he was young, like, and here they are playing their freshmen, right? Like, this is where it goes back to and I used to say that in the Air Force all the time, we've got to play our freshmen and we've got to give them a chance and we've got to train them. But when I think about high performing teams, you care less about the stripes that they have. You care about what they're going to bring to the fight so that you can get after that fight. I'm curious for the modern day military in 30 years from now, if you're even going to have an officer in an enlisted corps. I said that by the time to a 3-star general in the Pentagon, and he about fell out his chair, right? Like, because he couldn't even get past the notion of what I was saying. But I'm like, sir, we're talking 30 years from now. If in today's world we have the smartest, brightest, most talented enlisted force in history, like imagine what we will be like in 30 years. And then, right, I could even go even deeper on design. Like if you designed a military to be able to compete against the challenges we're going to have in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you you had a whiteboard and you were planning out what our Air Force or Army or Navy or Marine Corps needs to be designed to look like to be able to compete, would we create it with an officer and enlisted corps? I don't know. Again, you might have to cut all this out because some of your folks are just going to like, right, boycott. But I would offer we should be unconstrained in our thinking, especially with this generation, because we all bring different talents to the forefront. And that's for right corporate America too, right? We got to get back to playing our freshmen, play the folks that are going to be able to help us get after our mission. So I do think there's got to be a level of hierarchy. I just don't know if it would be the way that it looks today.
Right. Yeah. The
Yeah.
traditional hierarchy where because I'm so and so rank or because I'm so and so title, because I'm so and so whatever qualifier, you need to do what I'm telling you to do. Whereas, yeah,
So today's United States military, right, especially in your Air Force, you have more people joining with college degrees
true.
than ever before. This is very different from the military 1960. So
Right.
so so this is where I say like we've got to think about evolution and what that looks like and we've got to do it smart and I'm confident that we'll get there.
Yeah, we just to that point, Joe, real quick. We were, one of the organizations Kim and I've been working with is, the maintenance group at Tinker their for the AWACS. And some of the folks we were talking to, they came in when they were 27, 28, 29 years old. And I mean, these are tech sergeants that are like in their late 30s, right? And their perspective that they had and the experiences that they had before they even went to BMT. I mean, they had already had legitimately 9 years of experiences post high school, and the perspective that they brought as a tech sergeant and was just exceptional. I mean, some of those conversations that we had were just like, wow. Like I mean, I didn't think like that. I probably don't even think like that now, but as a major lieutenant colonel, it was just exceptional. So it's to your point. I didn't really, Kim and I got done with that conversation, and I'm just like thinking, wow, if I got that from one of my squadron commanders, that would have been an A plus sort of response or A plus input to the challenge that we had. And this was a tech sergeant who, at that point, had already lived a couple lives.
So it's interesting that you bring up this up, and again, just the circular nation of uh, this is that multiple years ago, I'm coaching a ice hockey team in Vermont, and I have these two captains. And again, maybe 30 years ago, it was one captain, two assistants. That's the hockey way. That's what we grew up with. That's what it is. And here where I was, it was two captains, two assistants. That's the way. And when we went through, I did a different exercise, and I kind of pulled the team, and I said, hey, like, who represents you? Who's your leader? And then I said, why? And this was one-on-one. This wasn't, you didn't get to write it down and hand it in. It was, and man, I'm like looking at this list and I'm like, we need a bigger group. Like I just needed a bigger group. And so I approached these two captains and we're going through it. And I think their first thing was like that I was attacking them, that they couldn't do the job. And, I didn't really have the verbiage or the know-how to say that why I knew what I wanted. I knew what I thought we needed, but I didn't know how to get there. And anyways, long story short, one of the captains, Callum Jones, just out of the blue is like, let's call Colonel Smith. And so Joe, I should have texted him first, but he is older than me. So we called him anyways, and he answered. And literally I explained, like, this is my thought. We have 30 people. I think there should be 7 people on this. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. And Matt's basically explained flat leadership, and we went forth with it. And that was the last time that team went to the national tournament. And I think there's a lot of things that really played into that. And so again, just really appreciate the way that you, at least for me, brought that full circle, and maybe looking at something, with a modern flair, with a modern eye versus, we do it because 30 years ago, that's what they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. It brings me up to one of my favorite books, which is Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I used to share that analogy in the Air Force a lot. America's Air Force is the greatest Air Force in the world. But what got us here over 70 something years is not necessarily what's going to get us there in the next 20. And, like freedom is not guaranteed. And so we've got to be really thoughtful as military leaders on how do we make sure that We are leading and allowing our people the opportunities to help craft us to continue to succeed as we push toward there. And again, this goes back to this is applicable to, any organization, military or not. You've got to think what got you here is not necessarily going to get you there. How do we make sure we get there right?
That's 3 books. That's perfect. Joe, is there going to be a book someday that's going to talk about being born in Hawaii all the way to present day?
And how wrong that is. I have a
Yeah.
whole lot of things to say. It's funny because my team was like, "You should write a book called A Full Cup of Joe." So,
That's awesome.
yeah, so we'll see. There is actually this year, one of my projects that knock on wood I'm trying to complete is a 12 book children's series on
Oh,
character. And so I'm going to count on you guys to hold me to it, but I'm trying to get a children's book series out first because for me when we think about leadership it starts way left, right? Like we've got to impact this youngest generation to have the character, the values, the morals that we need them to have to take us there. So that's what it'll be about. And then maybe I'll build the courage to have my own book.
that's
Fantastic. Thank you again. You've been incredibly gracious with your time and your wisdom. And but what now? Again, we talked a little before. You just came back from Davos, from Switzerland. What is the next? I know you said you kind of took the uniform off, but like how are you continuing to lead and how do you lead into the future?
Yeah. It's interesting 'cause before I took the uniform off, I had a lot of people asking me, "Hey, what do you want to do next?" And I didn't feel like I had a great answer, right? It was interesting because I was like, "Man, I don't know what I want to do, but I know what I don't want to do." And so I do what I've learned to kind of do over the last 30 years, which is write stuff down. And so I started kind of writing notes for myself and I wrote down three things. And I was like, whatever I do, it has to fit into these three buckets. It has to be something that I'm good at. It has to be something that I love, and it has to be something that makes a difference. And if it doesn't do all three, I'm not going to do it. And so for me, as I've shifted into this new chapter, that's kind of, how I decide that's, yes or no. And so I spend probably about 40% of my time in kind of the nonprofit space. And that's just, sitting on some boards that are focused on our veteran community, because I'm a full believer that if we take care of our veteran community, that'll take care of our military community. It'll ensure we have a strong military, which impacts national defense. And then the other 60% of my time really does go to strategic advising and spending time with organizations that have values that align with mine. And so that's what I'm doing. But 100% of the time is pretty cool because I actually get to be full time mom and full time wife. And that was something that I wasn't able to do for a majority of my career. So my husband and I have not gotten sick of each other yet. And the time with my kiddos has been really rewarding because I've spent more time with them, coaching them and learning how to parent different. So it's been a blast.
you've mentioned 3 books and there's probably many more out there, but as you're writing the 12-book series about character for children, and if you haven't read this yet, Joe, I think it dovetails nicely into what it is you're trying to do. But have you read The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers at all?
No, I have not read that.
It is exceptional. The author is Maxwell King. I just got done listening to it. Kim and I both take long walks with our pets when it's not, 25 degrees below zero
Yeah.
outside. But yeah, it's an exceptional book. And I think that just the second you said talking about character, I think back just to my childhood and just the impact that Fred Rogers had on me, just, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and character is the essence of what it is that he was trying to achieve with essentially our preschoolers and whatnot. It is a tremendous book, and it kind of gets into a little bit about public radio and public television and how he kind of transformed that into, just the teaching modality that he created. And it's truly exceptional. It was a book that I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah, I can't wait to check it out. Listen, I did a post recently on Instagram and LinkedIn about Schoolhouse Rocks.
Yes.
And it right, and it could have honestly been Mr. Rogers, Schoolhouse Rocks, Electric Company, whatever.
Yeah.
But
Right.
we need shows like that. The kind of shows that are investing in our kiddos because how much time they're spending, and so we need some of that back. And it was pretty cool to see so many people chime in to say you're right. So I hope that our nation will start to kind of get more center in that values piece because we need it. Again, we are I was sharing earlier this week with a group that our nation is going to hit 250 years, and we were founded on values, and just those values have really made our nation so great. And while we might have ups and downs, and we do, we will always find our way to the North Star. And so, but it's not going to happen on accident. We're going to have to be very deliberate on how we pour back into our children and focus forward.
I love that. And I just, in the interest of your time and just the graciousness that you've provided us, I think that's probably a good place to stop. Would you agree, Cam?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And again, just what you've shared with us, with our listeners, is unbelievable. So I appreciate it.
Joe, we'll give you the final words, and whatever message you would like to share in whatever capacity we're listening.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on again. What a fantastic podcast. The Colonel and the Coach, and for everything that you guys are doing to just help influence and shape in the space that you're in. To all of your listeners, thanks for listening, because obviously you're here so that you can continue to focus on being the better version of yourself. I tell people all the time that it'll take all of us to get after that very thing. And the one thing that I will share with you as I think about authentic leadership, that sometimes we don't do authentically well, and that is take care of us. And so to all of your listeners out there, do not feel bad about taking care of yourself. For 27 years of my Air Force career, I probably did a lousy job of that because I felt like I needed to give more into my career, less into me. But the reality is the more I fill my own cup, the better I'm going to be on all fronts, whether that's as a leader, as an airman, as a mom, as a wife, and all of those things. So be unapologetic about taking care of you. Think about the four pillars of spiritual, social, physical, and mental, and make sure you're taking care of you so that you can be your best version. And ultimately, that leads to helping to create healthy communities and a healthy nation. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, and however I can be your wingman, I'm there for it.
Thank you very much. Outstanding.